Evening, we begin tonight with breaking news. We have obtained what is expected to be a central piece of the government's case against Donald Trump. The actual audio recording of the former president talking as if he's showing a highly classified document on U.S. war plans against Iran with people not cleared to even know it exists, let alone what's in it. In a moment, only on CNN, you will hear what jurors will hear one day. The recording was made 2 summers ago, July 2021, at the former president's club in Bedminster, New Jersey. You will clearly hear the former president as he is speaking to several people. According to the special counsel's indictment, they include a writer working on Mark Meadows' memoir, the publisher, and 2 of Trump's staff members. The president was aware he was being recorded. This is the first time it is being played publicly.
Welcome to the Dr. John podcast. This is happening right now. A secret recording made inside the Situation Room just aired on Morning Joe. No warning, no preparation, no spin. Trump's own voice, his own unguarded words, playing live for the entire country before anyone had a single second to get ahead of it. And that's what makes this different from every other scandal. The one weapon every politician relies on when something damaging breaks is time.
Well, an audio recording has surfaced where former President Donald Trump appears to discuss classified documents in his possession at his New Jersey club in 2021 with people who did not have security clearance.
I'll show you an example. He said that I wanted to attack Iran. Isn't it amazing? I have a big pile of papers. This thing just came up. Look. This was him. They presented me this. This is off the record, but they presented me this. As president, I could have declassified it. Now I can't, but this is classified.
Now we have a problem. That audio was first obtained by CNN, and a transcript of part of that conversation was included in a federal indictment charging Trump with 37 criminal counts. Trump denies any wrongdoing.
Time to lawyer up, coordinate talking points, build a narrative. That window just got slammed shut. A leaked audio recording destroys that preparation window completely and instantly. Because the moment that tape starts playing on live television, the moment that recognizable voice comes through speakers into the ears of millions of viewers simultaneously, there is no spin that can be assembled fast enough. There is no narrative that can be constructed before the public has already heard the words in the voice they know. The audio exists, it plays, and the immediate unscripted reaction from the people most threatened by what it contains tells the watching world everything they need to know about whether the recording is as devastating as it sounds. That is exactly the territory we are walking into right now. Let me take you back to the documented reality of how White House audio has actually worked in the historical record. Because before we talk about what Morning Joe just aired, we need to understand the landscape that made this leak possible in the first place. The Trump White House had one of the most extensively documented internal leak cultures in modern presidential history. We are talking about books, articles, recorded conversations, notes from meetings, contemporaneous accounts from people who were physically present for the most sensitive and most consequential discussions of an entire administration. All of it emerged over time through a steady stream of insiders who concluded that the public understanding of what was happening inside those walls was significantly different from the actual reality of what was being said in the rooms where the real decisions got made. This is not a characterization from political opponents. This is the documented historical record of how information about the internal workings of the Trump White House entered the public domain across years of reporting and book publishing and first-hand account sharing from people who were actually there. The leak culture was real. The gap between the public statements and the private conversations was real. And the insiders who decided to correct the record by sharing what they actually heard and witnessed were real people making real calculations about what the American public needed to know. Now, why does audio matter more than written notes or verbal recollections? This is the critical distinction that most people miss. Written accounts from insiders are valuable. They have been enormously consequential in building public understanding of what happened inside the Trump White House. But they are always subject to the credibility challenge. The person who wrote the notes or gave the verbal account can be attacked on their motivations, their reliability, their access, their interpretation of what they witnessed. Those challenges do not make the accounts untrue, but they create enough uncertainty in enough minds that the full accountability impact gets diluted by the credibility debate that surrounds it. Audio does not work that way. Audio does not have a credibility problem in the same sense because the audio is the primary source. The voice on the tape is either the voice it sounds like or it is not. The words being said are either the words being said or they are not. The tone, the specificity, the planning character of what is being discussed comes through directly to every person listening without any mediation. That is the specific and critical difference between audio evidence and every other kind of insider disclosure. And it is the difference that makes a leaked White House recording one of the most specifically alarming things that can happen to a political figure whose public statements do not fully reflect what gets said in private rooms. Then there is the Morning Joe dimension, because the specific venue where a leaked audio recording gets aired matters enormously for how the disclosure lands and what the immediate political consequences look like. Morning Joe is not a fringe outlet. It is not a niche political podcast with a small audience of dedicated followers. It is a major cable news program with a significant and politically engaged audience that includes exactly the people who shape the immediate response to a major disclosure. Journalists, political operatives, congressional staff, donors, party officials, they are all watching when Morning Joe stops the normal panel discussion, acknowledges that they have received a leaked recording, and plays it on air. The disclosure happens simultaneously to exactly the audience that is most positioned to immediately translate what they hear into political and legal action. Lawyers on television call it smoking gun evidence within minutes of the tape airing. Democratic members of Congress demand hearings before the morning show is even over, and the White House and Trump surrogates are immediately in the position of having to respond to a public that has already heard the recording for themselves rather than being told about it secondhand. The venue matters. And Morning Joe, as the venue for a leaked White House audio disclosure, is specifically and practically the most damaging possible platform for exactly the reasons that make the immediate political consequences so fast and so cascading. Let me tell you about the response pattern, because the way Trump and his allies react when audio disclosures happen is one of the most specifically revealing and most consistently documented behavioral signals in the entire Trump accountability story. Pay very close attention to this pattern because it tells you more about the authenticity and the significance of a recording than any formal authentication process ever could. When a recording is fabricated or meaningfully taken out of context, the immediate and instinctive response is to say so directly. That is not my voice. That conversation never happened. That recording is a complete fabrication. Those are the specific denials that would flow immediately from a campaign and a legal team that genuinely believe the recording is fake. But when the response instead focuses on context and interpretation and attacking the network and questioning the motivations of whoever leaked it without ever flatly saying it is not my voice or that meeting never happened, the response pattern itself becomes the tell. Lawyers call it the non-denial denial. And every time it appears in response to an audio disclosure, it signals the same thing. The voice is real. The meeting happened. The words were said. And the only available response is to try to argue about what the words meant rather than whether they were spoken. Watch for that pattern. When you see it, the recording is telling you the truth. Now let me break down the full picture into 3 specific dimensions that each deserve careful attention. First, the documented history of White House internal leaks and what that history reveals about the gap between public statements and private conversations. Second, why audio evidence is categorically more powerful and more difficult to manage than every other form of insider disclosure. And third, the cover-up planning framing and what the documented pattern of how Trump and his team have managed crisis actually reveals about the relationship between public transparency claims and private strategic reality. Let me walk you through all 3. The documented history first. The Trump White House leaked at a rate and with a consistency that was genuinely extraordinary by historical standards. Senior officials shared information with journalists. Former officials published books with detailed accounts of private conversations and internal deliberations. People who were present for sensitive meetings provided contemporaneous notes and accounts that corrected the public record in specific and documented ways. Bob Woodward published entire books built on recorded conversations with Trump himself. Conversations that Trump had apparently forgotten or not expected to become public. Conversations that showed a significant gap between what Trump was saying publicly about specific situations and what he was saying privately when he thought he was speaking in a context that would not immediately become part of the public record. That is the documented baseline. The gap between the public statements and the private conversations was real, and it was documented by people who were in the room. The specific character of those private conversations, the candid assessments, the strategic planning, the blame allocation that happened when the cameras were off, was consistently more revealing and more alarming than anything the public statements would have led you to expect. The specific categories of private White House conversation that have been most revealing in the documented leak history give you a concrete picture of what a leaked audio recording from a crisis management meeting could realistically contain. Woodward's recorded conversations showed Trump privately acknowledging the severity of a crisis while publicly minimizing it. Former officials describing internal meetings about sensitive events showed private conversations about legal strategies and political calculations that were significantly more specific and more alarming than anything the public statements from that period acknowledged. Other former officials describing internal discussions about the handling of sensitive materials showed private conversations about what to do with documents that were significantly more revealing than the public claims of innocence and ignorance. The pattern is consistent across multiple different crisis contexts. Private conversations reveal specific strategic planning about how to manage information and blame and narrative in ways that the public statements present as something completely different. An audio recording of those private conversations, unmediated and in the actual voice, would capture that gap with a specificity and an immediacy that no written account or verbal recollection can fully match. Now, let me talk about why audio is categorically more powerful. Documents can be argued about, their meaning can be contested, their context can be disputed, their authenticity can be challenged, verbal accounts from insiders can be attacked on credibility grounds. Written notes can be questioned on accuracy grounds. All of those forms of evidence require the audience to make a judgment about the reliability of the source and the accuracy of the account before accepting its implications. Audio removes that mediation. When you hear a voice, you recognize saying specific words in a specific tone in a specific conversational context. You are not making a judgment about a secondhand account. You are forming a direct impression based on primary sensory evidence. And that direct impression is much harder to dislodge with alternative explanations or credibility attacks than any judgment based on a secondhand account. That is why recordings have been at the center of every political accountability moment that actually changed the course of events. The Nixon tapes, the Access Hollywood tape, the Georgia phone call. In every case, the recording was the moment when the gap between the public narrative and the private reality became impossible to manage because the evidence was primary and direct and available to everyone simultaneously. And in every case, the response pattern from the person whose voice was on the tape told you more about the significance of the recording than anything the person actually said in response. Now, the cover-up planning framing. This is the dimension that transforms a leaked audio recording from a damaging disclosure about private candor into something with direct legal and constitutional significance. There is an important distinction between a politician saying something privately that contradicts their public statements and a politician being recorded planning a specific strategy to mislead the public about a crisis or a damaging situation. The first is hypocrisy. The second is potentially obstruction or abuse of power, depending on the specific content of what is being planned and the specific governmental resources being discussed for use in executing the plan. When a recording captures not just a candid private assessment, but a specific planning discussion about how to slow walk documents, coordinate talking points to mislead the public, shift blame onto political opponents for a situation the speaker knows those opponents did not cause, and weaponize governmental processes for political rather than governmental purposes. The legal significance goes beyond simple political embarrassment. It becomes evidence of specific intent to use the power of the office to deceive the public and obstruct accountability. Legal analysts would characterize that as the core elements of a cover-up. That distinction matters. And the specific content of what gets captured on a leaked recording, whether it is private candor or specific cover-up planning, is the difference between a political problem and a legal problem with constitutional dimensions. The insider source dimension adds another important layer. When a leaked recording comes from an insider with direct access to White House recordings, the existence of the leak is itself a significant story independent of the content. It means someone with access to the most sensitive internal conversations decided that the public record needed to be corrected and that the specific content of what they had access to was important enough to justify the personal and professional risk of leaking it. That decision does not get made lightly. It gets made by people who have a specific and serious concern about the gap between what the public is being told and what is actually happening in the rooms where decisions get made. The fact that someone in that position made that decision tells you something about the character and the severity of what the recording contains. Insiders do not risk their careers and their legal exposure to leak recordings of routine political spin. They leak recordings that they believe the public genuinely needs to hear, because what is on those recordings reveals something about the conduct of the people in power that is incompatible with what those people are claiming publicly. That motivation is itself part of the story, and it is a part that makes the content of the recording more significant and more credible before anyone has even heard the tape. Let me bring this all home with 4 clear points. I want you to leave this with a complete understanding of why the leaked audio scenario is grounded in real documented patterns, why audio evidence is categorically more powerful than every other form of political accountability disclosure, why the response pattern to a leaked recording tells you more than the formal denial does, and what we need to watch as the documented gap between Trump's public statements and his private conversations continues to generate the conditions for exactly this kind of disclosure. The documented history of internal White House leaks from the Trump operation establishes a real and specific baseline of insider disclosure culture. Senior officials leaked. Former officials published detailed books with recorded conversations and contemporaneous accounts. People who were present for sensitive internal discussions provided accounts that corrected the public record. The gap between the public statements and the private conversations was real and documented across multiple different crisis contexts. That documented baseline tells you that the conditions for a leaked audio disclosure have been present throughout. The question is not whether insiders with access to private conversations have information that contradicts the public statements. It is whether the specific conditions that motivate a particular insider to take the personal and professional risk of making that information public align with the current moment. And the accelerating legal and political pressure creates exactly the kind of conditions that have historically motivated insiders to make that decision. Audio evidence is categorically different from every other form of insider disclosure in ways that make it the most specifically powerful and the most specifically alarming accountability tool. Primary sensory evidence versus secondhand account. Direct impression versus mediated judgment. Voice and tone and context arriving simultaneously to every listener versus a summary that requires interpretation. The specific characteristics that make audio so powerful are also the characteristics that make it so specifically difficult to manage with alternative explanations or credibility attacks once it becomes public. You cannot argue people out of what they heard with their own ears. You can try to dispute the context or the interpretation, but the impression has already been formed before any contextual argument can be made. That is why recordings have been at the center of every political accountability moment that actually changed the course of events. The non-denial response pattern is the most reliable real-time signal of a recording's authenticity and significance. When allies focus on context and interpretation and attacking the network and questioning the motivations of the leaker without ever flatly saying, "That is not my voice," or "That meeting never happened," that response pattern is telling you something specific. It is telling you that the voice is real. The meeting happened, the words were said, and the only available response is to try to argue about what the words meant rather than whether they were spoken. Legal analysts who have watched political scandal response patterns for years are unanimous that the non-denial is one of the most reliable tells in the entire accountability landscape. It is the response of a team that has assessed the authenticity and concluded that denying the voice or the meeting is not a viable option. So they argue interpretation instead. And every time they argue interpretation instead of authenticity, they are confirming the authenticity by the specific form of their response. Here is exactly what we need to watch. Watch the insider landscape inside inside the Trump operation for any signals that the fractures and the loyalty questions that have historically preceded major insider disclosures are developing. Insiders who are publicly distancing themselves or asking questions or expressing private concerns are the specific precursors to the kind of major disclosure decision that a leaked audio represents. Watch Morning Joe and similar major platforms for any signals that they are in possession of or pursuing specific material that goes beyond what has already been in the public record. Major media organizations do not advertise that they are pursuing leaked audio, but the specific questions they ask and the specific framing they use often signals what they are working on. Watch Trump's social media activity for any unusual escalation of attacks on specific media organizations or specific former insiders that could signal awareness that damaging material is being prepared for disclosure. Preemptive attacks on specific targets are one of the most reliable signals that those targets have something the Trump operation is worried about. The documented history of White House internal leaks establishes a real baseline. Audio evidence is categorically more powerful than every other form of disclosure. The non-denial denial pattern is the most reliable signal of authenticity. The cover-up planning framing transforms a damaging disclosure into a potential legal problem. And the specific conditions of this moment, the accelerating pressure, the insider fractures, the documented gap between public statements and private conversations, create exactly the environment in which the specific decision by a specific insider to correct the public record with a specific leaked recording becomes not just possible, but increasingly likely. The conditions are there, the motivation is there, the platform is there, and the gap between the public narrative and the documented private reality is there. Drop a comment below and tell me what you think. Is a leaked White House recording the accountability moment that finally changes everything? I will see you in the next video.